Hello and welcome to today's session. My name is Alex Ball. I am the Director of Growth Marketing here at Workforge, and I am very excited for today's presentation. Is your operation prepared and able to meet the FDA's food traceability requirements? And I'm thrilled to have Erik Kurdelak joining us. Before we get started today, I'm going to run through a couple of quick housekeeping items. First off, everyone is muted by default. If you do have any kind of technical need or have any questions, feel free to use the questions and chat feature on the bottom right of your control panel. After the session, you will immediately get a copy of the recording, and then later today we'll send you a copy of the slides and a couple other resources that we're going to share with this group, and I'll talk about more of those in a bit. But before we get going today, I did want to do a quick poll question just to see where everyone is as far as food traceability. So on the bottom right is a polls section, and I have launched a poll that is, what is your level of understanding of food traceability today? Are you starting from the beginning? Do you know the basics but not the details? Or are you already building your plan and joining today to look for some best practices and some ideas to enhance or expedite your plan? So I'm going to give folks just a second to submit those, and then we'll get going into the meat of the session. Right. All right. Well, let's keep moving. Chris, if you want to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Thank you. So as I mentioned, we have a very special guest with us today who is Erik Kurdelak, who's the food safety expert and subject matter expert for Workforge. He has 25 years of experience in food safety, has worked with the state of Indiana as a subject matter expert for the Food Protection Division. He has done extensive work with Purdue University's Food Science Department and is a founding board member of the Central Indiana Food Hub and Sustainability Center. So very excited to have Erik join us. And without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to him. Thanks for joining us today, Erik.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to look at the food traceability rule requirements and the ways that you can prepare your operation for the FDA's compliance date in 2026. So we're going to start off looking at the agenda here. We've got some definitions we're going to cover that are very critical to make sure that we're all on the same page with the expectations of the FDA. We're going to look at the actions that are needed for compliance and some different approaches to get those tasks done. And then what does FTR really suggest for the future of compliance in the United States? And we're going to look at some things that you can do to prepare. So the first of our lists of definitions is actually the food traceability list. And so what do we need to know? These are the items that require the enhanced traceability. And I'm sure you've seen the list of soft cheeses and produce, fin fish, nut butters, the shell eggs, mollusks, crustaceans, and ready-to-eat deli meats. So there are a lot of different items that are on the food traceability list, but this rule also applies to foods that are manufactured using FTL items. So if you, for example, were to manufacture a quiche and you put a soft cheese in the quiche, well, now you've got an FTL item that is being transformed into a new product, and it is going to be subject to the food traceability rule requirements. The next definition we're going to look at is the critical tracking event. Critical tracking events are really talking about the flow of an item through your facility. This basically asks the question, when? So when do you have to record information? And when do you have to have traceability records? And when you think about the primary critical tracking events, they can break down into receiving, holding, transforming, packing, and shipping. So there are several CTEs that are outlined with a lot of specificity in the code. We're looking at these 5 right now. And the CTEs are the point in the flow of the food where that key data element has to be captured. And so the next definition is the key data element. We're looking at KDEs. And so with KDEs, this is going to tell you what information is required for each of the CTEs. So what do I need to record? not all the CTEs are going to require the same KDEs. So data that's collected as an item flows through the facility is different at the different critical tracking events. You're going to have different people involved in different expectations of data elements that are captured. So for example, if you're looking at the critical tracking event receiving, you may have different individuals capturing that key data element than the individuals that are at the critical tracking event of transformation. So transformation may have different people, okay? So we have to try to make this as approachable as possible and really to make it user-friendly within our operations. One of the things we can do is to group our CTEs. And we'll see that in the graphic here, that you can kind of consider ingredient receiving and holding as a single group, right? So the people that are bringing the products into your facility or doing the first land-based receiving, or the people that are doing the harvesting, who's bringing it in and who's holding it, these are often going to be the same individuals. So they're going to handle certain key data elements. Later, when something is being transformed and packaged, there'll be other individuals that are handling those key data elements. And then if you think even later into the flow of food, when you have product that is held as a finished product or shipped as a finished product, you might have even another group of individuals that are dealing with those tracking events and key data elements. Now, when you think about something like transforming, you can have 14 KDEs around transforming. And why is that? It's complex, right? Because you have to have the tracking events for the initial ingredient. And then when you do your process and you generate the new food product, there are going to be data elements that are associated with the final product. And so you're going to have a lot of KDEs transforming. And something like packing, you may only have 9. So it's not a one-to-one type of operation. And you look at it and say, well, all these KDEs are overlapping. Well, that's very much intentional, okay? The expectation is to see some duplicate data capture at different steps throughout the process. And it really helps to pinpoint if an event happens, when did the event occur, when did we have a risk, and how small can we make the recall event? And so you might say, well, we've captured this here and we're going to capture it here and capture it here, capture it here. Yes, but different people are looking in on it all along the flow of food. So that's a really important note. We're going to move on to the next definition, which is the traceability lot. With the traceability lot, this describes what constitutes one batch, right? So what is one batch? What is one lot of a product? The traceability lot answers the question of how much. How much is involved in this lot? And the lot size is something that is determined by the operation. It is not set up by the government. It is not, there's not anybody that's going to come in and say, you have to have a lot size of X number of cases or X number of hours or however you want to parse it out. But there are pros and cons to having large lots versus small lots. And we have a nice graphic that kind of shows that. When you have the very large lots, yes, there's less data capture. Traceability becomes simplified. But when you do have a recall event, it's a huge, complicated, expensive event. You have a lot of items that could be put into a hold status, could be condemned. You can have market withdrawals. You can have all kinds of different things that are happening, and it affects a lot of inventory. But if you have small lots, well, you have much more data capture, especially if you're changing your lot codes every 2 hours or something like that. You're going to have a lot of data capture. But if you had a recall event, it would be smaller, it would be pinpointed, it would affect less of your inventory and less of your customers potentially. So you want to set your own balance. You need to decide what is right for your organization. So you can set the balance point, you can set the lot size, but when you think about the traceability lot, we're really talking about how much. Now we're going to look at the traceability lot code. The traceability lot code, this is how a batch or a lot is identified, okay? This is going to be an alphanumeric code, and you will assign this when you've transformed a product. You're going to assign a lot code. And it can be something that is a Julian date. It can be something that shows a line number, or maybe it can show, a different shift, or any number of things. You can put what you need in your alphanumeric string of digits, but it is required under FTR that there be an explanation that the next recipient of that product needs to be able to discern what information is in that traceability lot code. So when you assign your traceability lot code, remember, you have to have some kind of an explanation that accompanies it to the next user. Then we're going to look at the traceability lot code source. And this is basically the organization. So who assigned that traceability lot code? So this answers the question of who, and really somebody has decided what's the format of the lot code and how is it going to be applied, when is it going to be applied, is it going to be on a sticker or direct print, or is it going to be in some other mechanism? Somebody made those decisions. The traceability lot code source tells who, in terms of what organization determined that that was the lot code that was going to be used. The next term we need to look at is the traceability lot code source reference. And that basically tells you where was this lot code source located. So very often this is going to be the address of your facility, or if you're looking at an incoming ingredient and that had a lot code assigned to it, what was the address of that actual manufacturer? And so we want to look at this in terms of answering the question, where was this decided? So that's what your lot code source reference is all about. That's probably enough for definitions for right now. We're going to look at a little bit of the plan. Okay. Whenever you are dealing with items under the food traceability rule, you must have a plan. You have to have a food traceability plan, and you got to be prepared to share that plan when the FDA comes in. They're going to come into a facility and they're going to say, hey, I see you have some FTL items here. Can you show me your traceability plan? So we have some good news about the plan, and I can tell you that on the next slide, we're going to look at the elements of this plan. This plan is less complex than most of the other plans that you are going to build in your operation. It's not as complicated as a HACCP plan, for example. There are really 5 elements in this plan, and a lot of operations will only deal with 4 of the 5. So the first element is going to be that you have to define your procedures for maintaining records. So you got all these records that are required. How are you going to maintain those records? You got to write it down, put it in the plan. It's one of the core elements. The second element is, how did you decide, how did you identify which items in your operation were going to be on the food traceability list and which were going to be subjected to the food traceability rule requirements? So how do you maintain your records? What was your decision-making process regarding what is involved in your plan? And then how did you assign the lot codes? So how did you assign the lot codes? That's going to be the third element that is required in a food traceability plan. And then the fourth is going to be the contact person, point of contact. If you're in this webinar, you're very likely going to be listed as a point of contact. So in your operation, if somebody has questions, hey, how did they arrive at this lot code? When was it assigned? What does these digits mean? They need to know who to ask, and that is spelled out in the plan. And so being prepared to have your name listed as a point of contact is important. If you happen to be a grower, if you're growing or raising the foods, then you have to include a farm map as well. And so those are the 5 elements. And like I said, it's not that complex, but you have to have it. You've got to have it all tightened up and ready to go when they ask for it. There are some plan expectations that we're going to look at. And the plan expectations are that you really need to keep that plan current. So if you are the point person for your traceability plan and you get promoted or moved into a different role or moved into a different facility and somebody else is going to be the point person, you've got to update that. You've got to keep it current. Or if some of your practices were to change, or if you had changed, one of your critical tracking events. Anytime you have a change, you have to have a revision. And one of the expectations is that you keep the prior version of the plan for 2 years. So if the revision date were today, then you would keep that original version of the plan for 2 more years. Okay, and so we have to retain the prior version, even though we're working off of a revised version. Another expectation is that you don't get to make exceptions. Your plan has to cover all of the FTL items. So let's say that you had a bunch of produce that was coming in and it was going to be on the food traceability list, and you're combining the produce into a soup. And so you're making this soup, and that soup has been transformed. It's transformed the FTL items into a new product. You have to have, a lot code for that new product. And if you also took those produce and made a casserole or something with it, or made something different with it, made a sauce with it, you can't say, I'm going to have the food traceability rule apply to the soup, but not to these other finished goods. That's not allowed. There are not exceptions. If you're transforming these items, you've got to apply the food traceability rule to those finished goods. Okay. And then the other expectation is that you're not changing the lot codes. Once it's assigned at a critical tracking event, so let's say at transformation, you've assigned a lot code, and this is how we're going to describe our soup. Well, somebody who's doing packing or somebody who's doing shipping, they can't change that lot code. The lot code has to carry through all the way to your facility, all the critical tracking events, and it has to carry through to the next recipient of that product. Okay, so there's a lot of different things to think about there. We're going to look at some of the required records, and we're going to look at receiving. So if we are receiving, what are your key data elements? Really, you want to look at your ingredient lot code. So the ingredient that is coming in is going to have a lot code. It's going to have a quantity and a unit of measure and a date that it was received. You're also going to look at the ingredient lot code source. So who assigned that ingredient lot code and what was their address? And a lot of times you're receiving items that are not direct from the manufacturer. There's a distributor in between. So you need to know that ingredient supplier's name and address as well. So all of these things need to be captured as KDEs around receiving. And then also you need to look at the document type that captured the information in the first place. Where did you get that data? Maybe you got it off a trailer check sheet or a bill of lading. Maybe you got it off of a PO. Whatever the document was, that was the document type that gave you the information for the KDE record. You need to know that document type and that document number. So that's pretty important. When we look at transforming, that's a more complex one because it's going to have all the different things that are required for the ingredient. So what date did you transform the product? What was the ingredient involved? What was the quantity and unit of measure of the ingredient involved? So certainly this will be often different than the amount received. So you received a large amount, 1,000 cases of something, and you put 400 of them in storage and 600 of them went to the line. So 600 are being transformed. So you need to capture that quantity and unit of measure. Okay. And that ingredient is going to have a lot code and somebody who assigned that lot code and their address. So all that stuff is required in transforming as half of that critical tracking event. The other part of the critical tracking event is going to be for the finished goods. So when you are transforming and you're looking at your finished goods, then you have to look at the product description. And so what is it? Let's say that you brought in peanut butter, and peanut butter is a nut butter, and you received it and you brought it in and you're making peanut butter cookies. Well, on this part of the transformation, you're not talking about the peanut butter, you're talking about the cookies. So the product description is cookies, and how many were made, what was the unit of measure, and who assigned the lot code. That's going to be your organization, your company. And then what was the reference document that shows that lot code and really the reference document number. So those are important KDEs to think about in terms of transforming. Now, when you think about shipping. With shipping, you want to look at the lot code of that finished product going out and the unit of measure of the quantity and product description that's being shipped. You need to have your facility address, and you need to have the date that it is shipped. You also want to look at the location address for the next recipient of the food. So if you were to think about somebody coming into your facility and saying, hey, we had a problem with this ingredient, it's under recall, or it has to be condemned, or whatever the concern is, and they say, we know it's on the food traceability list, we know it came to your plant, how much did you receive, where did it go after it was processed here, and so we've moved it on, where did it go? We need to know the recipient of the food, we need to know the location addresses, and you would have that very often with your shipping documents, and you can have a reference document and a document number associated with that. So those are really important. The records, there's some general requirements for all of the records. One of the things is going to be that the records are legible and protected from damage. So you don't want to have loss of your records. You don't want to have anything that is, let's say it's an electronic record. You want it to be on a secure server that's not going to have things unintentionally deleted or manipulated. But if it's on paper, then you say, okay, well, where are we going to keep this? Are we going to keep it in bankers' boxes or filing cabinets? And how do we protect, from fire and from water damage and things like that? So you have to have legible, protected records, regardless of the approach that you use. Another general requirement is availability of the records. Records have to be made available within 24 hours of an authorized FDA representative's request. Now, that is very, very important. You need to understand that the clock starts running at the time of the request. And FDA does not have to request this face-to-face. They don't have to come to your facility and ask for it. They don't have to request it in writing. They can telephone and leave a message. And if you were to get a message from FDA that was asking for your traceability data, and that message came in at 8 o'clock in the morning, and nobody happened to notice it or check that until 1 p.m., well, you don't have 24 hours. You've burned 5 hours waiting to check your voicemail. You've got 19 hours to get the documents to the FDA. Another requirement is that it has to be provided in a sortable spreadsheet. Well, if it has to be in a sortable spreadsheet, and you're looking back 2 years and you've got bankers boxes full of papers, how many keystrokes are involved? Who's going to do the data entry? How are you going to get it into the spreadsheet and provide it in the format that is required? You also have to have an explanation of how to use the spreadsheet. So electronic data capture is really heavily being pushed through the use of the food traceability rule, because it's not always going to be practical to do this with pens and clipboards. It's not always going to be practical to do this on paper. And so when we look at records retention, you have to retain these for 2 years once they are created or obtained. And so an obtained record would be knowing the lot information of received ingredients. Okay, that has to be retained for 2 years. And you can do that on your searchable spreadsheet. Or if you generate the lot code yourself, then of course that would also have to be retained for 2 years. Now, a lot of us are already going to have food traceability plans because of SQF or BRC or other requirements. And there is no one that I've talked to in FDA that is expecting people to build a new system from the ground up to handle this. FTR can dovetail into your existing food traceability plan so long as it covers the key data elements at the critical tracking events. And so when you think about that, that is a really big task if you have no foundation to build from. But if you already have a foundation of food traceability and you're doing your mock recalls and you're doing all of the different traceability exercises and you're building an extension to that plan, it's a lot more approachable. You are allowed to supplement existing records as necessary, as long as it includes all of the information from the subpart. Now we're going to look at some of the different approaches that can be used. Oh, and actually, one of the approaches is going to be paper. And you think about paper and you say, is it even possible to do this with clipboards? Is it even possible? And it may be, even though it's not ideal, it may be possible to do it if you have very few food traceability list items. So if you were, say, a produce house and you had 40 different types of produce and multiple cuts and preparations and washes and packs of each bit of produce, it would be quite daunting to do all of your receiving and your packing and your transformation and holding on paper, okay? But if you were an operation that, let's say, going back to the cookies, if you were making the cookies and you only had one cookie that involved peanut butter and that was your only food traceability list item, then you could probably say, okay, when we run the peanut butter, we're going to keep these spreadsheets going, right? But still, if you were to keep that on paper, you've got to transfer that to an electronic record. And whatever originals you have, they got to be secured and organized and kept for 2 years. So we think about that as compared to an electronic data capture. Electronic data capture has its own set of considerations. So multiple barcodes. So if you have a barcode on a product, did it come there from the manufacturer or from the distributor? And now you're going to transform it and you're going to put another barcode on it. How many barcodes are we talking about? And how can you add existing information to a current how can you add new information to an existing barcode? So all of these things come into play. Will you need one code for supplier and another one for your operations? Yes. And when we think about how much information can be embedded into a QR code or a barcode, is there a way to clean that up and put it all in one place? And so that's a lot of data. And then you get into the data security question. So data management, data security, even things like the server, who's paying for the server that's housing all of this, and what are all the different implications with electronic data capture. And certainly when you have a multi-tab spreadsheet, then can be populated by scanning it with a barcode scanner, and it's populating all these fields that are going to be duplicate fields. That's certainly convenient. But again, there are some considerations that we have to bear in mind when you have electronic data capture. When you think about personnel, who's assigned? Are you going to have a team or an individual that's doing traceability and following traceability tasks through the whole flow of food, through the whole facility? Probably not, right? And so you're going to have to deal with your frontline employees on this. You're going to have to talk about them in terms of, hey, this is your existing task that you already do to capture information as you're handling this food item. And we want to make the smallest amount of changes to that task so that it's approachable and that it's achievable. If you think about food traceability as a giant undertaking, it's overwhelming. But if you say, you're already doing part of this, we're going to add one little piece, and you have many people doing a little piece, it adds up to meet the needs of the food traceability rule requirements. And so when you think about involving the front line, the big question is, how will you train the front lines? And how will you make sure that they understand why food traceability rule is there and why the food traceability is being done? And auditors, the auditors that I've worked with and trained over the years, we have instructed them to talk to the frontline employees and ask them direct questions about their food safety culture, ask them direct questions about their food safety habits, and we can ask them about traceability. Why is traceability being done? What is your role in food traceability? And as an organization, what steps do you need to take to prepare your frontline employees for those conversations when you have an auditor on site? So there are a lot of different personnel considerations there. We also need to look at externals. So there are external considerations as well. So what is the net impact on your mock recall? So you put all this food traceability in place and you have to run a mock recall for BRC. Okay, so what is the impact of having all of this in place? I would expect that your mock recall exercise gets shorter and more targeted than ever before. So it should make things a lot easier there. And how will you handle when a customer demands that you use their tracking platform? So when you're doing corporate document sharing and you say, well, hey, everything is set up here, let's say on TraceGains, and somebody else says, well, we're using ReposiTrak, and we insist that everybody uses ReposiTrak, or we have our own home-built system. And how do you handle those types of pressures? So you've got all of these different implications from external forces when you do your traceability. And also, sometimes you're going to see people passing costs through. So an ingredient supplier saying, hey, we had to do all this extra stuff for food traceability rule, and it comes at a cost, and we're going to have to pass some of that through to you. Well, now that's one of many ingredients, and all the ingredient suppliers are passing through their costs. Well, then what does that mean to my finished product and my margin, right? And then there becomes a question of, the scope of this. If you're going to have to put in food traceability rule requirements for certain items, why not do them all? If you're going to do this undertaking, apply it to everything in your facility, and then you're going to be ready when items are moved on and off of the food traceability list. You need to appreciate that FDA has the right to add things to the food traceability list, just like they can add things to the GRAS list, and they can drop things off of the GRAS list or other lists that they maintain. So FDA has authority to change the food traceability list once this gets rolling. And so it may be preemptive to say we're going to use a broad approach and just cover everything with the same expectations. But then really we think about what does this mean for the future, right? And so let's go to the next slide. And also, what is the most common approach? The most common approach is going to be that interdepartmental approach with the electronic data capture because of necessity. So the necessity is that it's going to be electronic data capture and a lot of different people working together to make this happen. But I did want to talk a little bit about what all of this suggests for the future. So when you look at digital records and FDA expecting some kind of a spreadsheet that's searchable to be very, very quickly provided to them, you have to ask yourself, what about other governing bodies? If FDA can come in and say, I want this operational data in this format, in this very short timeline, what's to stop OSHA from asking for operational data in the format that they prefer, in the timeline that they choose? What's to stop USDA or EPA or any other governing bodies? The food traceability rule is really pushing folks in an unprecedented way. And I think the operations are going to really see this as a precedent-setting event. And so if the governing bodies are having a lot of compliance and a lot of success with requesting digital-only records and 24-hour turnarounds, I think we can anticipate other governing bodies doing the same. So what should you do about all this, right? How do we proceed? How do we get started? I mean, it's coming. You've got 15 months. And in the 15 months, it's important that you really understand the requirements and that you assess what are your options to execute this work. And once you've defined what options you're going to use and what approach you're going to use, you got to build your plan. You got to build your plan. Like I said, it's not an overly complicated plan, but there's a lot that has to be carried through it. Okay, it has to be applied over and over and over and over. And then you've got to effectively train your team. And when you say effectively train your team, I'm talking about having basic awareness training that people need to know that, hey, food traceability rule is coming. We are doing these things to take care of the items on the food traceability list. But beyond awareness training, you need to have a user level training that within my role in the big picture, I have to capture these key data elements, and I have to do it at this tracking event, and I'm going to use this mechanism, this tablet or this scanner or this clipboard or whatever it is. I'm going to capture that data in this way. And then you need to give yourself time to implement, to have a dry run, and to really test it before 2026. And moving forward, we're going to have Alex talk a little bit through ways that Workforge can help you along as this rolls out.
Well, Erik, thank you very much for all of that. And one of the things I mentioned at the beginning of this is that we would have some resources we were going to share with this group. And one of those is a checklist that Erik has helped put together that will help you go through all the right steps to build your plan and to hopefully be a helpful guide as you go through all of this. And as we mentioned, I just want to share briefly before we move into questions, just a couple ways that Workforge can help you. One, I think we start with the employee retention. Our hire to retire approach to employee development helps a lot of our customers decrease turnover. And as you go through this potentially interdepartmental approach and adding things to so many folks' plates, it's going to be even more important than ever to not only retain your best employees, but to not have to add things that you have to train the new folks on, right? So we can help you there. We do have traceability as part of our food safety pathway and can help with some of those basics Erik talked about. We can also help you build custom training modules for your unique standard operating procedures. So everybody's going to have to do traceability a little bit differently. Everybody's setup is different, so it's not going to be as cookie cutter as some other things. So we can help build that custom content for you. We also can help with all the digital training records that you may need, and then just can help drive some operational efficiencies across through having great training and just a well-oiled machine across your frontline employees. So I want you to know we're here to help. And if you're interested in learning more about any of these, just please reach out and we'll help go into a little bit more detail on what those could look like. We are going to take questions from the audience. So if you go into the